Joining me now is political analyst Mark Halperin. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Katie. How are you?
Great to have you. We are 16 days away from this election. Latest numbers from 538 polling in the 7 key swing states show former President Trump with leads in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Vice President Harris, though, slightly ahead in Michigan and Nevada. And both candidates are tied in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, a dead tie in both of those states. I've seen you talking about this live on X lately, Mark, quite a bit, doing a great job and getting a lot of different voices out there. Where do you think the two candidates stand at this very moment? And does either side feel like it has more momentum in this race at this point?
Well, Katie, if you look at the public and private polling, everything's margin of error stuff, right? Nobody's got a 6 or 7 point lead in any of the 7 states. What Donald Trump has going for him is he does have some of the momentum. His campaign is projecting confidence. They're not saying they're the underdogs. They're saying they're going to win. That's contrary to what the Harris campaign is doing. And what he's also got is we know that the polls have historically understated Trump's support. On the Democratic side, what do they have? They have, without a doubt, more money and, without a doubt, a larger and maybe superior effort to turn out the vote, whether that's early vote or on Election Day vote. So right now, I've said for a while, I think President Trump is at least a slight favorite here. But those Trump supporters who think it's over, I think they're just wrong. The states are just too close right now.
An NBC News poll shows 52% of voters saying they plan on casting their ballots early this year. Now, by party, Democrats appear to have the edge in early voting nationally, 47 to 36%. But in the key swing states of Arizona and Georgia, Republicans are now outpacing Democrats in early voting. Your thoughts on this?
Well, it's almost certainly the case that in these 7 states, Democrats will have the edge on the early vote. But the question will be how big an edge and who are the folks voting early? I think we saw in 2020, the early vote accounted for Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump. The lead is going to be smaller, but it's still going to be a lead for Democrats. And I think we're going to know probably in a week to 10 days just how those numbers shake out. Right now, there are bright spots for Republicans. You're showing one of them there. In some of the states, Republicans are doing better. And in every state of all 7 states where there is data, they're doing better than they were doing in 2020. So Republicans have at least somewhat addressed the challenge from 2020, where the early vote just made it impossible for Donald Trump to catch up on Election Day.
I want to talk about what we'll know and when, because that's a big question mark. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, for example, the ballots aren't processed until Election Day. Then Georgia has this hand count issue this year. Will we know who won within even days of this election?
Katie, I'm recommending boxes and boxes of Good and Plenty and bottles of diet Dr. Pepper, because we might know. Look, there's 7 battleground states. If one of the candidates wins 6 or all 7, we're going to know. If it's 4-3 or maybe even 5-2, or at least appears to be headed that way, we probably won't know for at least a day or two, and maybe much longer. We know that, unfortunately, these 7 states that are going to decide the election, they're not the best counter. And if it's a close election, they're all going to go for accuracy over speed.
So in one of those battleground states, Wisconsin, fewer people are casting their votes earlier this year compared to 2020. This has historically helped Democrats each election cycle, as we've been reporting. If this advantage goes away, though, is this going to impact the election?
Well, again, it's not just sufficient to say how much of the early vote is there compared to 2020. We've got to figure out who those folks are and what parties they're in. And some states have different data, like Wisconsin. I think it's natural that there'd be lower vote by mail because there's no COVID. And so much of what drove the record turnout in early vote from 2020 was COVID. I think you're going to see, as I said, Republicans will do better in the early vote than they did 4 years ago. The question is, what's the delta between how they did 4 years ago and how they do this time? And you can bet that these numbers are being closely watched by both campaigns, and they're trying to figure out how can they do better, because every early vote that's banked is an advantage both practically and psychologically.
Yeah, those cold weather states, a lot of people like to vote early because you just never know about the weather. The Trump campaign just released its latest political ad. Let's take a look.
A father of 3, sentenced to life in prison, Kamala Harris pushed to use tax dollars to pay for his sex change.
I made sure that they changed the policy so that every transgender inmate would have access.
It sounds insane because it is insane. Kamala was the first to help pay for a prisoner's sex change.
So how much do you think ads like that are going to impact the Harris campaign in this final stretch? And I want to add that this was legal when President Trump was in office.
Yeah, look, the difference is, from the Trump campaign's point of view, is he's repudiating this idea. She was given an opportunity to repudiate it when she did an interview last week, and she said she'd follow the law. It's done damage, and some Democrats are frustrated that Kamala Harris hasn't responded through paid advertising. This is, as the Trump campaign has put millions of dollars behind this ad. There's some ambiguity, as you point out, but the reality is they do have differences on some of these issues. And Kamala Harris, for whatever reason, doesn't so far want to address it, either in interviews or in paid media. And if she loses, this ad is going to be cited as one of the maybe half dozen reasons, maybe a dozen reasons why she lost, because she failed to define herself. Remember, the Trump campaign wants voters to see her in their famous 4 words as weak, failed, and dangerously liberal. And this ad goes to at least a couple of those.
Yeah, I think people were surprised by that answer. I'll follow the law. Mark, thank you so much for being here.